At Irewole High School, the whispers of Amara, Chiamaka and Ifeoma echoed through the halls like an unspoken rule. These three girls were inseparable, and everyone knew that if you saw one of them, the others were never far behind. They had the look, bold, confident, and unapologetically attractive. Their uniforms, short skirts, and tight blouses, though against school regulations, became a statement of defiance. They wore their attire as armor, and everyone from the students to the teachers knew they were trouble. The girls' primary pastime was flirting with power, flirting with the teachers, and flirting with the boundaries of what was acceptable. But they weren't just being playful, they were using their looks and charm to get what they wanted. Amara, the leader, was always the first to initiate. She'd flash a smile, let her eyes linger, and drop just enough hints to make her teachers falter. Ifeoma, with her teasing nature, always played the role of the sweet innocent, while Chiamaka, the most unpredictable of the three, would add a dash of mischief. The game was always the same: make the teachers feel flustered, see how far they could push their limits, and win a little extra attention or favors in return. But their antics had never gone beyond harmless fun. Sure, they enjoyed the power they had, but no one had ever truly challenged them until Mr. Olumide arrived. When Mr. Olumide entered the classroom for the first time, the air seemed to shift. He was tall, composed, and dressed sharply in a suit, his presence immediately setting him apart from the other teachers. His dark eyes were calculating, and his deep voice carried an authority that made everyone listen. There was something about him that made the girls stop in their tracks. This wasn't like the other teachers who blushed or tried to avoid eye contact when they noticed the girls' flirtations. Mr. Olumide was different. Amara, ever the leader, was intrigued. She couldn't help but notice the way he carried himself, the quiet strength in his demeanor. It was like nothing she had ever seen before. "We're going to have some fun with this one," she said, a mischievous glint in her eyes. They spent the next few days trying to capture his attention in their usual ways, flashing smiles, leaning over their desks a little too much, making sure their skirts were just the right length. But no matter how much they teased him, Mr. Olumide remained unmoved. He wouldn't meet their eyes for too long, and if one of them tried to play the coy act, he would simply say, "Please focus on your work." It was infuriating for the girls. They weren't used to being ignored. They were used to having all eyes on them, to making teachers stammer and blush under their gaze. But Mr. Olumide seemed immune to their charms, and that only made them want him more. Amara, Chiamaka and Ifeoma began to change their tactics. They wore tighter blouses, lower-cut tops, and more daring skirts, making sure they were always in Mr. Olumide's line of sight. But even then, he didn't respond. There was no nervous laughter, no awkward silence, just an unwavering professionalism that made the girls feel frustrated and confused. Mr. Olumide didn't look at them like the other teachers did. He didn't get flustered, and he didn't give in. "I don't get it," Ifeoma muttered one afternoon, sitting on the school steps with the others. "No matter what we do, he won't even notice us." "He notices us," Amara replied, her voice low and thoughtful. "He just doesn't react the way we want him to, and that's what makes him interesting. We need to figure out what's going on with him." It was then that they started to notice something strange. At first it was subtle, but soon it became undeniable. Whenever Mr. Olumide was near, the air around them seemed to grow colder. The classroom felt different when he entered, as if the very atmosphere had changed. The sunlight would dim for a moment, the shadows in the corners of the rooms stretching just a little bit longer. It wasn't just the girls who noticed. Their classmates began to talk about it, whispering that there was something unnerving about the new teacher. One night, after a particularly strange lesson, Amara had a vivid dream. In it, she saw Mr. Olumide standing in a dark room, surrounded by symbols she couldn't understand. His eyes were glowing with an unnatural red hue, and his grin was sharp, predatory. She awoke with a start, feeling a cold sweat on her skin. Her heart raced as she tried to shake off the feeling of dread that lingered from the dream. It wasn't just a nightmare, it felt real, like a warning. The next day, Amara couldn't shake the thought of Mr. Olumide. There was something off about him, something she couldn't quite put into words. When she told Ifeoma and Chiamaka about the dream, they dismissed it as just a bad night's sleep. But Amara was sure of one thing. She needed to know more about Mr. Olumide. As the girls followed Mr. Olumide one afternoon after school, they didn't know what to expect. They had noticed him walking in a direction they hadn't seen him go before. Out of curiosity, they decided to follow him, trailing him through the streets of the town until they reached a part of town that was unfamiliar to them. An old, abandoned part where the buildings looked decayed and forgotten. They watched as Mr. Olumide entered a crumbling house on the edge of the woods. The house was covered in vines and looked like it had been abandoned for years. The girls exchanged uneasy glances. They knew they shouldn't be there, but their curiosity got the better of them. "Should we go in?" Ifeoma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Amara didn't hesitate. "We have to. We need to know who he really is." They crept up to a broken window and peeked inside. What they saw made their hearts skip a beat. The room was dimly lit by candles, and strange symbols were drawn all over the walls. Mr. Olumide stood in the center of the room, chanting in a language they didn't understand. The air around him seemed to hum with a strange energy, and the shadows in the room twisted unnaturally. Amara's breath hitched. "What is he doing?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Let's get out of here," Ifeoma said, fear creeping into her voice. But Amara couldn't look away. She was drawn to the scene, even as every instinct told her to run. Mr. Olumide suddenly stopped chanting. The room fell silent. Then, slowly, he turned his head toward the window where they were hiding. "Run!" Amara hissed, grabbing the others. The girls bolted, their footsteps echoing through the empty village. When they finally stopped, their hearts pounding, they didn't dare look back. "We shouldn't have followed him," Chiamaka said, her voice shaky. "Something's not right," Amara replied. She didn't know what, but she was sure of one thing. Mr. Olumide wasn't just a teacher, and whatever he was, it wasn't human. The end. Watch out for part 2, moral lesson. Not everyone you would mess with, not everyone is who you think he or she is. You have to be careful. Comment what you learnt from this folktale and make sure you subscribe.